Hey, welcome back to Business 150, Introduction to Management. This is video number 2 in our module on human resource management. And as you can see here in this particular title slide, in this video we're looking at the topic of human resource planning. Now wait a minute, what did we look at in the first video? We looked at human resource management, and we finished up that discussion hinting at the whole topic of forecasting demand. And so that's really what we're talking about here. We talk about human resource planning. What we're talking about is the function of trying to understand right up front what are our human resource needs and what will be our future human resource needs. So we hope that at the end of this video you'll be able to summarize how managers may plan for human resource needs. And of course, what that means is not only needs in the present, but especially needs in the future. So, human resource planning involves forecasting the organization's future demand for employees, forecasting the future supply of employees within the organization, and then designing programs to correct the discrepancy between the two. So again, think about that from the most 10,000-foot view. You're looking at two sets of predictions. One, what is our future need going to be? Then two, what can be supplied by the existing employees we've got? And how do we bridge the gap? So let's take a look at this. When we talk about forecasting our future demand, there are a couple of tools that we use. The first tool is a set of quantitative tools or statistical methods, and the second are qualitative. But in this slide, we're looking at the first group of forecasting tools called quantitative or statistical methods. And you can see there from the description, these are methods of forecasting that include things like a productivity index and a regression analysis to try to understand statistically what do we predict or forecast will be our future needs. So if you think about it, a productivity index can be defined as taking your output and dividing that across the number of people responsible for that output. If, for instance, you're trying to figure out what are your sales needs, well, what's the typical annual sales revenue of a seasoned salesperson? Once you make that calculation, you can figure out, well, how much annual sales revenue does each salesperson tend to contribute? And then you know, well, if our goal is to increase revenue by this much, we probably need a few more salespeople. And you, of course, then can do the simple arithmetic. That's a little different than a regression analysis. You can see here a regression analysis, also a statistical tool. The difference is you're really looking at the influence of multiple factors upon whatever target you're trying to measure. And so, for instance, there are many things that may impact overall sales revenue in addition to the number of salespeople you've got, right? And one of the questions you're asking is, if I have this much money to throw at this problem, to invest in solving this problem, where should I invest it? What number will influence a bigger increase, for instance, in profitability? If you're trying to increase not just sales revenue, but profitability, where is my dollar best spent? Should I hire more salespeople? Do they make the most impact in profit? Or should I hire more production staff? Does that make, over time, historically, seem to make a bigger impact upon profitability? Or is it something like another department entirely, post-sales care? What is really the department that seems to make or have the highest correlation statistically with increases in profit? And then, of course, what you're saying is, underneath this premise is, I only have a fixed amount of, or a finite amount of resources to devote to this problem. Where will I get the biggest bang for my buck? Regression analysis seeks to identify the factor or the handful of factors where you should think about investing, because that has historically given you the most influence for a dollar spent. Now, there is another whole category of methods, not the quantitative methods, but the qualitative methods. And you see here, qualitative methods of forecasting rely on experts' opinions and judgments and you use those to estimate the appropriate numbers. So typically these would be relying upon economists who specialize in your industry or your region, industry experts and newsletters, and those kinds of predictions about labor and the market and those kinds of things. But of course, qualitative analysis really kind of rests upon the presumption that what happened in the past will predict what will happen in the future, because very few things will change. And so all things being equal, if everything remains the same, then we can pretty much rely upon history as a fair predictor of the future. But what happens when things change? And of course, this is what we're seeing, right? Everything from a mass pandemic to shelter-in-place orders to changing landscapes affecting entire economic industries. Yeah, a lot of things changing. And so at what point do experts and economists simply throw up their hands and say, we're not really sure what this is going to look like 12 months from now? So in a time of less turmoil and less upheaval, qualitative analysis can be very, very useful. But nevertheless, then you see there, you have these two categories of methods of forecasting: quantitative and qualitative forecasting methods. And the idea here is collating all of this data, all of the forecasting you can do to come up with essentially two predictions. Here is the first prediction. If our human resource programs remain exactly the same, how many employees and in what roles can we expect to have at this date in the future? Knowing that historically, some people stay with the company, but they move and migrate to another role within the company, and some people leave the company for all sorts of different reasons, right? But you always have this movement in your existing employees. And so that being said, if everything else remains the same, how many employees can we expect to have? That's your first prediction. Your second prediction is, based on all the quantitative and qualitative analysis, how many people in the external job market do we believe will have the skills we need at that point in the future when we need to meet these new organizational goals and objectives? And with these two predictions in place, then, now human resources can predict how and where to find the necessary talent for both present and future needs. If, for instance, you need to increase your overall staffing by 20%, given the first prediction, and knowing that, well, it does look promising that there will be more and more folks in the external job market who will have these kinds of skills in the future, well, then you know how to bridge the gap. You're going to have to go on a recruiting and hiring program in order to fill your future needs. That's just one example of how these things kind of play out. So we hope that with that brief description of forecasting, planning, and predictions, that now you can sort of summarize how managers may plan for future human resource needs. This is, of course, a dynamic activity that demands some real expertise and experience to be able to do it well. It's certainly not just taking a blindfold and some darts and throwing some numbers at the dartboard. It really does require some experience, knowing who to trust in terms of outside industry expert opinions, and knowing really what's necessary for your company and what you can expect from your existing staff and employees. I hope that's helpful. We'll see you in the next video.